Duwa, also known as Duwa, was Khan of the Chagatai Khanate. He was the second son of Barak. He was the longest reigning monarch of the Chagatai Khanate and accepted the nominal supremacy of the Yuan dynasty as Great Khan before his death. Under his rule, the Chagatai Khanate reached its peak. History. In 1282, Kaidu appointed Duwa as head of the Chagatai Khanate, in an effort to gain peace between himself and the sons of Barak, who had ravaged Central Asia for much of the past 10 years. This promotion ensured the loyalty of the Chagataids from that point to Kaidu's death. Several years earlier, in 1275, Duwa destroyed a force in Uiguria loyal to Kublai Khan, led by the Chagatai Dajika and Kublai's son Ayachi. He then laid siege to Karakoja for 6 months with his brother Buzma by 120,000 troops. They demanded the Kur commander Idikut Kokar to surrender, having said to him, "We have just overcome the resistance of 300,000 troops. How you with only one city can to withstand us?" Kokar replied to them, "I will follow my fate and destiny. This city is a place where I was born and raised. Its population has become my own family. If now I have to die, well, then let this city to have become my own grave." Nevertheless, the Mongol princes had failed to take the city by assaults during 6 months, and finally Idikut Kokar managed to have the siege lifted only by giving Duwa his daughter in marriage, and probably financial compensation as well. Soon afterwards, Idikut Kokar died in the occasional combat with Kaidu forces near the border of Yuan China. Duwa also may have given assistance to an unsuccessful revolt of Brigung sect against Kublai's authority in Tibet. The following year, Kaidu and Duwa launched an expedition against Beshbalik, defeated the Yuan forces there and captured the city. Entire population of Beshbalik was evacuated to Karakoja by Idikut Kokar. All of her cities in Dzungaria were abandoned by its population and turned into rubbles in a few years as a result of these Mongol attacks. In 1278, Duwa was reported to have led a raid into Yuan territory. Kaidu's attempts to spread his power within the Ilkhanate gave Duwa an excuse to invade that Mongol kingdom in early 1295. Supported by Kaidu's son Saban, he invaded Khorasan and Mazandaran while the Ilkhanate commanders were involved in a succession struggle far to the west. For 8 months he stayed in Mazandaran. When he left, he pillaged many cities on the way back. Duwa attempted to convince the Khatids of Herat to defect to his side, but they refused. He attempted to plunder the cities of Kushur, which he failed to do, and Fushang, which he succeeded at killing many of the inhabitants. A similar attempt on Herat never happened, since Duwa feared he would fail. He soon after was recalled by Kaidu back to Central Asia, and the campaign ended. Stiffening resistance by the Yuan commanders forced Kaidu and Duwa to pull back several times in 1297. In 1298, Duwa avenged these defeats when he attacked the Yuan garrisons during the winter. Most of the Yuan commanders were eating and drinking and therefore incapable of fighting. The Yuan Emperor Timur Khan, or Emperor Chengzong's brother-in-law Quaguz, who had been more ready, was unable to defeat him by himself. Duwa tried to convince him to abandon the Yuan side, but was unsuccessful in doing so. Duwa then withdrew, only to be defeated in battle by the garrison troops in what is today known as Kebaduo. Duwa's brother-in-law was captured in the midst of the defeat. A prisoner exchange was agreed to, and his brother-in-law was returned, but Quaguz died before returning to the Yuan court. In 1298 or 1299, Duwa appointed his son Kutluk Khoja as head of the Narunas, a Mongol group that controlled a large part of Khorasan. In 1300, Yuan forces launched a large offensive against Kaidu. The latter called on Duwa for assistance, but the Chagadade refused, claiming his forces were exhausted. Surprised by the answer, Kaidu sent a command to him, but soon had to turn east to meet the Yuan. Still, Duwa and his men eventually came to help him, and during one battle in 1301 he himself was wounded and defeated. Shortly afterward, Kaidu died and the political situation changed. Duwa ignored Kaidu's choice of successor, Oris, and instead picked Kaidu's firstborn son Chapa to take his father's place. Chapa was enthroned in 1303, thanks to Duwa's effort. Duwa insisted Chapa to submit to Timur Khan. Shortly afterward, Duwa sought to end conflict with Timur Khan, and around 1304 a general peace among the Mongol states was declared, bringing a formal end to the Kaidu-Kublai War that had involved all Mongol Khanates and lasted for over 30 years since the 1260s. Soon after, he proposed a joint Mongol attack on India, but the campaign did not materialize. The settlement favored Duwa much more than Chapa, a fact which set a rift between the two. Duwa hoped to throw off the mastery of Kaidu's son, he therefore sought to improve relations with Timur Khan. He had the advantage of being a legitimate heir to Chagatai's realm, while Chapa did not. Chapa refused to attend a meeting that Duwa arranged to celebrate the peace, and in 1305 or 1306 fighting broke out between the troops of both sides, probably due to Duwa's attempts to take control of parts of Chapa's lands granted to him by Timur Khan. The fighting lasted for a while but was inconclusive, while Chapa's brother Sarban gave up to the Ilkhanate and abandoned the Oxus region. But the region around Samarkand continued to be infested with supporters of Kaidu's family. Duwa proposed a peace, Chapa, believing that it was sincere and accepted, withdrawing his brothers. Duwa's forces then struck, defeating Chapa's supporter Baba, plundering Talis and overcoming Chapa's brother Shah. On the Eastern Front, Duwa convinced the border commander of Yuan, Kaishan, to strike and defeat Chapa's brother Oris in June 1306. Chapa then mobilized his own troops, but several of his commanders deserted him, and the Yuan sent a large force to Duwa's assistance. Surrounded by this army, Chapa surrendered. The northeast part of Duwa's realm was ceded to the Yuan dynasty, and Duwa afterwards received gifts from Timur Khan, signifying the restored relations between the Chagatai Khanate and the Yuan dynasty for the first time since the mid-13th century. Duwa at first gave Chapa a small domain and pension, but afterwards killed or captured many of his followers, and deposed Chapa in 1307 in place of his brother Yanyi-Cha, who had not fought Duwa previously. Part of Yanyi-Cha's realm was split off and given to Tugmi, a grandson of Gyu Khan. That same year, Duwa died, to be succeeded by his son Konchek. Duwa's actions went a long way toward freeing the Chagatai Khanate from its subservience to Kaidu and his sons, a situation that had lasted since 1271. Nevertheless, Kaidu's sons continued to pose problems for the Chagadade state. Duwa's successes in recreating the Central Asian state also proved to be transitory. Less than 40 years later, the eastern part of the Khanate would split off, and in the 1360s the western Khans would be reduced to puppets by Timur. Genealogy of Chagatai Khanates in Babanama, written by Baba, page 19, Chapter 1, described genealogy of his maternal grandfather Yunus Khan as